for us, the term university is very intentional. It signals our commitment to a holistic, strategic approach to learning, one that goes beyond just courses and workshops.
Hi everyone, I'm Richard Parfitt, the Marketing Director here at iVentiv. I'm delighted today to be joined by Martin Hess. Martin is the Global Head of Learning and Development, CLO, and Head of the Boehringer Ingelheim University. He describes himself as having a passion for driving change, and in his current role at Boehringer Ingelheim, he is responsible for implementing a skills-based learning approach at scale, nurturing and growing a learning culture, uniting L&D across the organization, and providing a powerful learning infrastructure to help the organization implement state-of-the-art standards for learning. No small tasks on that list there. Martin also attended iVentiv's Learning Futures Cologne earlier this year, where he led a breakout session on the ROI of learning, something we will get into more in this interview. But Martin, first of all, thank you for joining us and welcome.
And thanks for having me, Richard. I mean, I guess some of the things you just mentioned were taken from a LinkedIn profile. I should probably trim that down, a bit when listening to your summary, because it sounds very, very ambitious. But basically, what we are very ambitious at Boehringer Ingelheim, at the university. So, yeah. Thanks for having me.
No, it's great to have you, and we like ambition. It gives us lots of topics to delve into. And I was reassured when I was doing my research for this interview, and I looked on the website for lifelong learning at Boehringer, and there's a big banner message on the webpage that says there are no silly questions, which is very reassuring when tasked with interviewing you today. So I'll go to get us started. I mentioned in your job titles there that one of those is head of Boehringer University. So could I ask you to just tell us a little bit about what that university concept entails at Boehringer? We think of sort of traditional corporate universities, places like GE's Crotonville, which would be kind of focused on executive leadership. Are we talking about a physical place? How is it set up for those who aren't familiar?
Very good. Thanks for that question, Richard. So happy to share a bit what we mean by Boehringer University. And as an industry term, you would probably call my team the central learning and development team at this company. But as our core product, so to say, is the Boehringer University, we decided to call also the team the central team that way. So industry term versus kind of internal brand term, if you will. So for us, the term university is very intentional. It signals our commitment to a holistic, strategic approach to learning, one that goes beyond just courses and workshops. So we see the Boehringer University as kind of a roof brand, describing an ecosystem of dozens of learning units across the company, across geographies, everywhere in this world, that provides learning opportunities. And this is the most important thing for all of our 54,000 employees. So it's not limited to a certain, a group like leaders. It's for all employees, including leaders also. We try to cater to everybody's needs. And again, every level, every function worldwide. And every one of our 54,000 employees worldwide also has access to all learning content in one place, with very few exceptions only. And that one place where everything comes together, we call our virtual campus. And that also, reflects part of or answers probably part of your question. Is that a physical place? Right now, it would only be a mostly virtual place, but on that virtual place, you find also access to all the face-to-face courses being provided in the various units across the world. So we offer on the virtual place virtual trainings plus physical trainings.
And that must form a really important part of your messaging when you talk about the university being open to everyone. I was reading ahead of this interview an article published by Patrick Benamar at Renault, who was talking about how corporate universities need to be reinvented. And his argument was very much that this kind of traditional career path where you can take someone early in their career and have the steps set out from how they go from there to being a CFO or something along those lines just doesn't exist anymore with zigzagging careers and the ways in which people move about. So it must be really empowering for you as a learning team to be able to say this is open to everyone. This is kind of empowering for you. You're going to be able to lead this this process as well.
Yes, absolutely. We call it democratization of learning. So it's offering it to everybody,
Mhm.
but and it's also empowering our people, right? To be, as we say, in the driver's seat of your own development. So, saying it as one thing, but truly enabling them through offering them opportunities in all kind of dimensions to grow as a person, but also grow their careers. Um, is very powerful, as you said. So we feel very good about that. But again, it's a federation. So it's not only the central team. Overall, I believe we have more than 500 people in this company that provide small or big parts to the portfolio, basically content creators, curators, like that. So we call it a federated model. Yeah, it's not centralist. It's on the shoulders of many, which also helps, to be very relevant, because people in the business know very well what the business basically, or their respective audiences, also need in that very situation. And it's also something that we take pride in. We have established mechanisms to align what is being offered on the virtual campus, or even pushed to certain audiences, align this with the respective business strategies or business functional strategies, right? So we align learning to business goals, as we say. And that's also something where business leaders help us then in this situation very intrinsically, to push the right messages, to push the right skills into the organization, so people also learn, quote unquote, the right things.
Yeah. Okay, so that's really interesting. And you mentioned skills at the end there, which sort of brings me on to the next question I was going to ask about. We were talking about your LinkedIn profile before we started recording, and one of the key responsibilities you list, as I mentioned in the introduction, is implementing a skills-based learning approach at scale. So that sort of skills-based, that's been a real buzzword for the last few years in L&D. And so I was just wondering if you could tell us what that approach entails at Boehringer Ingelheim, and what are the key components that you're putting in place to deliver that approach and to deliver and measure ROI with it as well.
Oh, okay, I'll start with the first segment, and let's see how far we get with
Yeah.
all the questions they have. So a skills-based approach. The topic of skills was introduced by us at scale, means to everybody. Again, our audience is 54,000 people, everybody. So we introduced it with actually less than 2 years ago, when we were launched globally. We launched in particular the virtual campus to everybody. And suddenly people were asked, without a lot of explanation, set up your skills profile, right? Upload, if you wish, your LinkedIn profile, your CV, anything like this. And the AI would go through it and derive skills and suggest it very quickly to the user. So people were suddenly confronted with, hey, I have to build my skills profile. What we realized from talking to the learners is that was a kind of a wow moment, because many of them nowadays, I believe, with you're more used to this kind of things, but 2 years back there was still a wow, new kind of situation. So people uploaded their CVs, and suddenly they saw, oh God, I have probably 50 skills, some of which I wasn't aware of. And suddenly people think in skills very intuitively. That's probably the key thing that we learned from just giving it to people and exposing people to, hey, suddenly you have to think in skills. It works across geographies, cultures, and is kind of a dimension that is universally understood regardless of your background. You might have deviations here and there, but they're not significant, right? So even the assessment, the self-assessment, is something we are doing. Works very, very nicely across, again, geographies, functions, hierarchies, anything. Suddenly we realized, and people realized, how nice of an intuitive dimension skills are. It just works very, very well. So we gave it to the entire organization, and suddenly we started to think in skills. We suddenly collected skills at an organizational level. We could suddenly work with skills data. We could, create analyses and provide them back to business leaders so they could think or develop together with us and, of course, our HR business partner colleagues, what would be great ways to develop their respective organizations' skills in a targeted way. All of this made it much more concrete, and it works very, very nicely because of this. You could call it its an intuitive simplicity, more or less, that skills brought to the organization. If you talk to HR experts, it's not a simple thing. I get that, but in the end, it's what people make out of it, and leaders and employees alike work very nicely with this dimension of skills. So right now, it's rolled out globally, consistently, only in L&D. Well, only in L&D. Which is, again, a big thing already. The organization has a chance, or has had a chance, to digest this, to appreciate it. And now with a larger project, we expanded also into the other offerings and solutions coming out of HR, also on a global scale. So that's something that is in the making, but right now also on our end is not rolled out yet.
Right. Yeah, and I'm thinking of, when I hear criticisms of the skills-based approach, often we hear of organizations that kind of do the skills mapping part, get everyone to create a skills profile, and then they sort of don't know what to do with it from there. They sort of go through this very interesting exercise, and then they go, well, now what? So I just wonder, how did you approach that moment, if that moment occurred, at Boehringer Ingelheim, and how do you turn it from being an interesting exercise to being a really impactful one?
That's a wonderful question, because it's exactly as you said, or as you mentioned, in the early phase, many people, put in their skills profile. They created their skills profile, and suddenly they were asking, like, okay, what now? Of course, on our LXP, that is basically behind the virtual campus that I mentioned, there is AI in there that helps you, based on your skills profile, to focus your development in certain areas. But you have to basically choose those areas, those skills that you want to develop, and then the system feeds you with the relevant information and proposes you, very specific learning pieces or courses. So that's one thing of getting it into a direction, into a more targeted state. What we have been doing is, again, working with the leaders in the business, say, what do you want to achieve with your teams, with your organization? What are the business goals? Helping them to translate the business goals into skill needs, upskilling needs. Then again, what do we do with the data? We bring together the individual skill data, so not on an individual, but on an aggregated level. Present that to the leaders. Say, here, you just said these 3-4 skills would be absolutely essential for you to succeed in the next, God knows, 12, 24 months. Here is where your organization sees themselves, basically, right? So that's their own skills assessment. Now, where do you want to go? What is your expectation? And suddenly the senior leader would say, okay, in, God knows, ridiculous example, in gardening, everybody should, be at this level by the end of 2025. And suddenly you have a target, you can communicate this to the organization, and all of this suddenly makes sense, because every individual can, relate to that target and can say, okay, if we should be a level 4 by the end of 24, and I'm a level 2 right now, okay, I got to do some work here, right? So that's how we get direction into the whole game, basically.
And that's how you demonstrate to those leaders that what you've asked them to do and what you've done with that information has had an impact as well.
That's correct. So one way, because you mentioned ROI also earlier, right? One way of demonstrating a return, so to say, even though it's not quantitative necessarily, is by just, comparing self-assessment of people before in strategic skills, self-assessment after the intervention. If I hope it has increased afterwards or has achieved, the ambition levels. And again, we did the exercise with the leaders before to clearly link or derive those skills from their business goals. They absolutely appreciate that what learning and development is doing is supporting them in achieving their business goals. And that is, even though it's not quantitative, a very, very important element of our discussion at Boehringer. When it comes to, what's the return on investment.
And was it difficult to make that case? Did you have a lot of resistance?
No. So they appreciate our support to, help them operationalize their own business goals, because else, without this, learning to many leaders, in my experience, not only at Boehringer, also in other companies, that's a nice thing. Yes, it's relevant. It's good. It's very good that you're doing this. It's wonderful offering. But then, you realize it's not that high up on their agenda. It's not that relevant to them. Something they would tell their people, yeah, do it if you have free time in the Friday afternoon, whenever it is. I mean, slightly exaggerating, but you get my point, right? And with, hey, I understand as a senior leader how this helps me, how this supports my organization in achieving the business goals that we have. This becomes something you do on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, on a Thursday, so to say. So this is, it goes up in the priority list drastically once we apply this. And again, leaders appreciate this very much. And suddenly there is a perceived tremendous value of L&D for the respective business, which absolutely helps. But that is only, a small part, or a major part, I should not say a small part, of the ROI, because you mentioned ROI, and also mentioned that we had a session at the Cologne event about this. Something that we are doing, we thought of the ROI of our efforts. And, we need to appreciate that when I talk to many L&D teams in other companies, they rather refrain more or less completely from touching this topic of ROI. Everybody's like, yeah, I wish I had, but then most of the people that I talk to don't go that way. And probably it's a smart way to do that, because if you don't have sufficient quantitative data, it's hard to, create or to fill that formula with numbers, basically. If you have very little numbers, and most people don't have sufficient quantitative data. Now we're in a lucky position, because something we have implemented as part of the university program is global learning vendor management. So every external spend on training, coaching, external content, whatever it might be, goes through our systems, so to say, which we operate and have set up together with our wonderful colleagues from the sourcing department. This is something that, let's say, intuitively, very few HR people like to do. I mean, it's just when we went to the countries, the initial reaction was not so much love for this topic, but that has changed by now. That has absolutely drastically turned around. Why is this? Because again, it's not in our DNA to run vendor management, right? So I appreciate their reaction, but now with every transaction in the learning content space or training space going through this, we suddenly have data, right? So we have other than governance, which is a separate topic, we have data. We can very clearly say this part of the business is very much looking into these kind of topics, is spending most money on that. We can and have done that, put a external partner that is consolidating needs or requests basically from our people, and gets a much better deal for everybody in terms of quality, but also in terms of price. So in the end, everybody's winning. The learner is getting very, very quickly, with very little effort, a high quality training. The we get a lot of transparency and we can steer portfolios. Our country HR people also, have their data suddenly, and they know they have transparency on things that they have never seen before, basically, or did not have visibility of before. But first and foremost, we are offering much more today for far less euros, if you will, for the company. So higher quality at a far lower price than what we had before. And I give you an example. If I went to a vendor for gardening, which is my favorite ridiculous example, for a gardening training, well, I probably wouldn't get a great deal. If said vendor receives, God knows, 50, 100 gardening trainings because it's consolidated, suddenly my training, becomes far more affordable than before. And I am not typically, as a learner, an expert in identifying the best possible training or vendor, basically, right? So bringing some order, basically, in this in this system has been very, very rewarding, because again, then you can suddenly, and that's now I'm coming back to the ROI thing with my very long answer. I apologize for that. That suddenly we have data, we have numbers, we have euros. We can compare how much trainings cost, God knows, in 24 versus 25. And suddenly you can talk about the return. Do I claim that I can quantify the entire return of L&D at Boehringer Ingelheim? No, I cannot. But this piece alone is big enough to demonstrate to finance, to the people that want justification for the investments that they made. I mentioned 500 people that are working on this, not FTEs, 500 people, right? But it's quite a significant effort. Our platform costs a lot of money. The team itself costs a lot of money. So justifying that, besides what I mentioned qualitatively earlier with, working with the business, linking it to business goals, that is certainly helpful. But now quantifying it through the vendor management, insights, transparency, and outcome has been, oh my goodness, absolutely amazing. So the discussions as an L&D function with finance, once you have these numbers, are completely different and reading good and nice. So that's just, because usually, I mean, we know all this. We, as enabling functions tend to be rather cost centers than anything else, right? I mean, that's how they are perceived. So this quantifies how much money we saved the company while giving so much more quality and quantity to learners, has revolutionized our interactions with particularly the finance and controlling people.
Yeah, and it speaks to two themes we hear quite commonly, which is firstly that if you want to demonstrate ROI, you have to have a way of effectively measuring it. You've got to have the data available, and you've got to have the skills within your L&D team to be able to crunch that data and use it in a useful way. And then secondly, that not all ROI is going to come in the form of euro signs and dollar signs. It comes in other forms as well, something we're very familiar with in a marketing perspective as well in the function where I work. So thank you for the detail. You apologized for the long answer there, but I think people listening and watching will be really grateful for the level of detail you were able to give there when they think about how they could apply this to their own learning functions. And you referenced that session the breakout session that you ran in Cologne earlier in the year, where you were very much grappling with this topic, entitled the ROI of learning. So I won't ask you to breach the Chatham House rules that we operate our events under, but could you maybe tell us about what some of your key takeaways were from that session and how your work has evolved since then in the 5 or 6 months since you ran that session?
Happy to do that. So first of all, I got quite a number of calls after that Cologne event, because they were like, okay, I want to do the same. It's probably, what I took away is people, and that's perfectly fine in HR, they don't feel this is a part of their DNA. This is not something they intuitively want to do. But I'm probably takeaway that many people started to think differently about this because it's absolutely beneficial, and it's not the most fun part. Let's also be very clear about that. It's not the most fun part of L&D to do these kind of things, but it's super rewarding, and it's kind of giving peace or freedom to operate, in less quantifiable areas, basically, right? So those numbers alone allow us to expand and work more freely in the rest of our L&D work, which we cannot easily quantify. So that's a takeaway, and apparently it triggered quite some thoughts in some of my peers as well. And I believe there are some projects that have been started in some of the companies in the meantime. You said what has changed for us since then? Well, I mean, back then I believe we just rolled it out in the Americas. By now it's also in our homeland here in Germany, where corporate sits. It's rolled out, which is for us just quantitatively the two largest regions, right? So by now, I believe we have a coverage of 70% of the entire portfolio rolled into that kind of mechanism.
Okay, well, so there's been big steps taken forward on that basis. I just want to go back to what you were saying about the DNA of HR, because you mentioned it a few times. It's not in the DNA of HR to be doing this kind of real deep data work, this ROI analysis. Do you think the DNA needs to change, really? Is that something that needs to become a normal part of the HR and learning functions that we
absolutely I mean, again, it's so rewarding, and if we want to be respected by the business, if we want to be also appreciated as running HR sometimes a little bit like a business itself, not with a real P&L, I get that, right? But bringing in that kind of thinking, it cannot only be about spending and building beautiful things. It also needs to do the groundwork when it comes to these kind of aspects. And again, it's not something people have to do themselves 100%. You technically are a COE for that, right? For learning and for development. There are specialists in every company in sourcing that can, help you to set up these kind of things. So partnering with sourcing is not the most natural, call HR people so far have been doing it. But your question was, should more people do this? Yes. And again, through the event in Cologne, I believe more people got encouraged to take that step because it's super rewarding.
Fantastic. Well, and in keeping with your gardening metaphors and the floral backdrop that you've got going, you planted some useful seeds in many organizations, not just your own. So I mean, I'm sure they are very grateful. We are very grateful to you for sharing your insights at that conversation earlier in the year. So before we let you go, I just wanted to ask one final question, which we're asking all of our guests at the moment, which is, what is your controversial L&D opinion? So this can be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, a bit of fun. What do you think what is your controversial take on the current state of L&D?
All right, so let's see how controversial or outlandish the thought is. Right now, my team and I, and together with the learning units in the business, we are intensely thinking about what's the future of learning. What does it look like? What will it look like? Particularly given that AI is now in the game, and AI is easily said, but what does it really mean then? What's the impact going to be on Richard as an employee in the corporate learning context? And the term we have coined is hyper personalized. What does it mean? We believe that in the future, much or not all, much of corporate learning will be hyper personalized. What does that mean? It's powered by AI, of course, but it might be real-time curation or potentially even real-time content development, if you think about this, through AI. And if you think this through, this would revolutionize in many dimensions the way how L&D is operated today. But it would also allow us, think about it, our 54,000 people would, based on their individual upskilling needs, get kind of a prescription how to get there, which is a very interesting vision to have, basically. And it's not so far out there, so not sure if it's controversial, to be honest. But it's revolutionary if you think it through, like with all the dimensions that or implications it might come with.
Yeah, because it will completely change the structure of a lot of L&D functions.
100%, yes.
So I think that counts as controversial. Our audience can tell us if they think it's going to be even more controversial than that, or even less. But Martin, thank you so much for giving us your time today, and for sharing your story, your insights on the work you've been doing. Obviously, thank you again for joining us in Cologne in March earlier in the year, and we look forward to catching up with you again soon. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Richard, for having me. And let's catch up at one of the next iVentiv events. I like the event in Cologne very much. It was actually my first iVentiv event, but I'll be becoming a regular most probably.